Okay, well, good evening, comrades, and welcome to the series that the Labour Left Alliance is organising on Marxism. It's a series of sessions in which we're looking at the development of Marxism, particularly in the 19th century, or largely in the 19th century, with some references to today. And we're looking at the basic ideas that Marx and Engels put forward. We're beginning tonight with a discussion on the Communist Manifesto, its relevance, but also its role as the first major Marxist document, and it's obviously still a very important document today. In succeeding sessions, we'll be looking at the development of Marx's ideas on democracy, on the nation, and indeed on politics and its the influence of Marx and Engels on their contemporaries, particularly the development of mass socialist movements in the 19th century. There's a full list of the sessions, and each session will have a number of readings. This will help to guide the discussion, but also to follow up on the individual speakers. Tonight's speaker is Mark Lewis, who's going to look at the Communist Manifesto, its relevance, and outline its main ideas. I suppose for many of us, the Communist Manifesto is one of the first Marxist documents that we look at, and indeed it's had a great influence on socialist politics, even into the wider movement beyond the specifically Marxist movement. I'm sure, as Mark will mention, in 1948, the Labour Party actually produced a copy on the centenary of the manifesto's publication in 1848. And in that introduction, Harold Lasky talked about how even reformist politics had been influenced by Marx and Marxism. Anyway, I don't want to steal into Mark's talk, so we'll begin shortly. Just to remind those comrades who are new to the sessions, the way that we work is that the speaker will speak probably for around about half an hour or so, and then that will be followed by questions and contributions. If you want to ask a question or make a contribution, use the participants button and then use the blue hand to join the discussion. If that's a problem, or indeed you want to put a written question, which I'll monitor, then use the chat box as well. Okay, so I'll welcome Mark, and also welcome back comrades whose names I've become familiar with over the last year or so during this lockdown, and wish you both a happy new year, but also a good year's fighting for socialism throughout the British Labour movement and indeed internationally. So I hand over to Mark now. Okay, Mark, off you go.
All right, thanks very much, Kevin, and also thanks to the ever hard-working Tina and other LLA comrades for the opportunity to speak to this subject. Personally, I think it's essential in this very hard period for all of us, in addition to the 1,000,001 practical aspects of our political work, I think it's important that we find more time and more energy to discuss, yes, politics, but also the theory that lies behind some of the political initiatives that we take, to examine the historical triumphs and disasters of our history in forensic detail, to replicate methods that have worked, and to trash those really that have repeatedly proved themselves to be dangerously wrong. In many ways, this is the most important work, I think personally, that the LLA can devote itself and can devote its energies to in the long run. And I think all comrades would agree that the efforts of the comrades who run this sort of ongoing university of left politics, I think their efforts so far should be applauded. Not that I'm suggesting that we give the right wing of the Labour Party a free run. Let me assure you, comments. So thanks again. All right. Before we turn to the details of this session in terms of the actual the manifesto and what it says. We look at the libertorial working class politics of the manifesto. It's worthwhile taking a step back to briefly appreciate it from a different artistic angle. I don't think this is frivolous or pretentious by any means. This aspect of projecting politics can greatly enhance the impact of the work, even if not all of us can be a Trotsky. A few years ago, the left-leaning liberal Francis Wheen wrote a book on Marx's Capital. Politically, he engaged with it as you would expect a left-leaning liberal would, even an intelligent one. But interestingly, he also emphasized its artistic aspects. For example, Marx's use of the metaphor of capital almost as a Gothic horror tale to convey the vampirism of the system, draining life out of the working class. There are many other examples of this sort of imagery in Marx, of course. Certainly, Marx himself would take care about the artistic aspects of some of his writing, even though there is a school of thought, which I don't belong to, that he fussed about his art when he was actually late again in terms of hitting his deadlines, which was something he was also renowned for. Nevertheless, there was that sensibility, I think, in Marx and Marxism. In places in the Communist Manifesto, I hope comrades have had a chance to reread it over the days leading into this session. In places in the manifesto, the language of the work is simply quite dazzling. It's hugely enjoyable as a read, and is full of challenging categories that require real thought and intellectual sweat to grab hold of, to understand in a rounded type of way. So it's a demanding work in more ways than just the political. And implicitly, I think the approach of Marx throws a challenge down to all of us, really. And particularly the rather supercilious attitude that sometimes comrades in the movement can appear to take. And think that the written material targeting a mass working class audience must, per force, be dumbed down or simplified for the sort of bovine prose to get any grasp of it. This is one of the reasons why in the short list of recommended reading I've supplied for this meeting, I've included the useful work by Jonathan Rose, The Intellectual Life of the British Working Class, which is in effect an eloquent polemic against this lazy assumption about the working class and their relationship to complex ideas and to theory. Okay, here we go. The Communist Manifesto is obviously an extremely widely read book. I did a quick scout online for an estimate of the number of copies of the manifesto that have been sold. If somebody knows this, I'd be grateful. I personally found no reliable figures, but there's no doubt it is gargantuan. Apart from the sold copies, there are the huge numbers of copies of the Communist Manifesto circulated gratis by the Stalinist states. That's certainly how I got my little library when I was a small little Stalinist growing up in South Wales. So I didn't find any numerical estimates, but interestingly, I did find repeated over and over again in the various sites I visit, quote, the Communist Manifesto is ubiquitous, we are told. Of course, it would be odd, possibly borderline spooky, if there weren't aspects of the pamphlet that had become dated or had been superseded by events. Like the rest of us, it is marked by its specific time and place. Marx and Engels were aware of this, but instead of, running to keep up, they consciously took the decision to leave the core text as it was, although naturally they were very aware of the forward march of history that had antiquated some political movements that they once jostled with, certain leaders who had once rode high were now largely forgotten, etc. What they tended to do in order to keep the work fresh, as it were, is, yes, leave what was antiquated in place, but get the reader up to speed with prefaces. to actually get the whole thing into a contemporary mode, as it were. That said, when you master some of the vernacular, you can only be struck by how relevant so much of this text is to contemporary politics. And sadly, I'm afraid, from my point of view, how little it seems that self-proclaimed Marxists, self-proclaimed leftists of one sort or another have internalized the basic principles that are outlined in the Communist Manifesto, and which are easily grasped by working class partisans, even if those lessons that we're looking at and trying to absorb are sort of delivered with a 19th century accent, as it were. So, in my view, we are dealing with a document from 1848, yes, but there are still fresh, eminently useful contemporary lessons that we learn from the method of the manifesto and the political background that it emerged from. So, in a slightly arbitrary type of way, I originally drew out three lessons, three headings that I would speak to tonight. I don't think I'll bother with the third one, as I will drone on quite a lot, and it's sort of a sideways sort of approach to the issue. But so basically, I'll work to two headings where I'll try to distill from a rereading of the Communist Manifesto by myself the things I think are especially pertinent in the aftermath of the convulsions in the Labour Party of the past few years and politics in general, especially, including the rather dramatic developments in the United States over the past period. Okay, lesson one, principles first, then the masses. The manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, which is a detailed theoretical and practical document, was commissioned by the Communist League in June 1847. Its production was agreed by the League in its London Congress later on, November 1847, and it hit the streets on or around February the 24th, 1848. There's far more to the backstory, however, including the need to nail down which organization the manifesto might belong to and how it was perceived of by both the manifesto's authors, Marx and Engels, and the communists who instigated the publishing project in the first place. Okay, so what we have on the original title page of the original Communist Manifesto and on the outer cover of the pamphlet, we have the words, quote, printed in the office of the Educational Society for Workers by J.E. Burckhardt. Now, as well as earning a crust as a printer, Comrade Burckhardt was a member of the German Workers' Education Association, which in its turn, well, I hope you're keeping up, in its turn was a front for the Communist League. Apparently, the Communist League comrades went through lots and lots of names, despite being legal in Britain. Hal Draper tells us he despite a very close reading of the history of the Communist League and the organizations that preceded it, he can't work out why. So I'm not going to try. 1,000 copies were produced, and the Communist League comrades were invoiced for £5 for the printing. There's a little bit of pointless detail there for you, no extra charge. But strangely, it seems, the name of the actual publisher, the Communist League, the organization that must have undertaken the political, financial, organizational tasks related to the production of the publication itself, did not appear inside or outside the pamphlet. What was the organization that did get name checked in the new publication then? Well, strangely enough, more strangely, as it were, comrades may think something different. But the seminal program was touted as a manifesto of a communist party, despite the fact there was no such organization called that at the time. Certainly, no such organization in the orbit of the actors that I'm describing here. Note, I emphasize organization, although there were communists and communists organized into political organizations, there was no revolutionary organization named Communist Party at the time in the lead up to the production of the Communist Manifesto. To explain this, we need to rewind a little. The initial move to print the manifesto came from the interaction between two exiled German revolutionary organizations, actors we've already encountered, of course. The Communist League, traveling under one of its different names in London, and mostly composed of German artisans in exile in Britain, and Marx, Engels, and others who worked together via a political center in Brussels called the Communist Correspondence Committee. By the time the cadre of the League of the Just stroke the Communist League, that was its originally named the Communist League, League of the Just, were getting in touch with Marx and Engels, they were on a rapid political journey away from their founding template of what could be called artisan communism, as propounded by the League's founder, Wilhelm Weitling. Weitling, who was the creator of machines, one of his claims to fame was a creator of machines to make buttonholes, amongst his many other talents, was an advocate of utopian schemes to build socialistic colonies in the American wild, basically to dodge capitalism rather than overthrow it. Despite that, fundamental and as it turned out, to his political career, the death of his career, that given those politics. Nonetheless, Marx, in an article in 1844, referred to Weitling's work as, quote, the vehement and brilliant literary debut of the German workers. Although there are suggestions that Marx's praise for Weitling's appeals was the fact that he addressed the working class as a class. In addition, Marx emphasized Weitling's theoretical and philosophical brilliance, as he put it, which he compared favorably to the more economically inclined English workers and the more practically political orientated French workers. Now, Engels was on friendly terms with the core members of the Communist League, and especially the leaders. These included the watchmaker Joseph Moll. Engels had quite a political authority and personal status in that sense in these groups as a result of the popularity of the condition of the working class in England, his book on the poverty of the early working class. Put simply, the London comrades, who had been moving politically, were looking for a different, effective ideological template to give their work political coherence after the failed colonies endeavor, which had dispelled the end of Weitling's influence. For Marx and Engels, they would be given for the move to actually join the Communist League. They would be given a prominent political platform by the League to expound their views, specifically through the production and dissemination of a Communist Manifesto. And Engels puts it like this, as is a quote. In the spring of 1847, Joseph Moll showed up in Brussels to meet Marx and immediately after in Paris to see me, in order to repeatedly urge us on behalf of his comrades to join the League. They were, he said, convinced of the general correctness of our way of thinking, as well as of the need to rid the League of the old conspiratorial traditions and forms. If we were willing to join, we would be given the opportunity at a League Congress to set forth our critical communism in a manifesto, which would then be published as the Manifesto of the League. Now, eagle-eyed or eagle-eared comrades may have spotted that Engels makes a mistake here. He writes quite a few years after the events that the proposed manifesto would have been the publication of the League. It was not. It was the document of the Communist Party. Interestingly, Marx also added to this thread when he says, the manifesto of the Communist Party written by Engels and me was adopted after a lively debate of several weeks. Now, several weeks, comrades. I find this quite instructive, really, in that sense. Anecdotes like this seem to me to underscore the moan I made some time ago. The contemporary left, both in and outside the Labour Party, clearly needs to seriously debate to clarify their perspectives. It won't be done via our cramped discussions, the culture of cramped discussions that we have at the moment, I believe, with three-minute contributions and postage stamps, resolutions. I understand, we have a lot to get in, etc. But look at the way Marx, Engels, the Communist League took their politics, how seriously they took their politics, and how they, these people were busy men and women. They carved out the space to actually debate these things in depth, in tremendous amounts of depth. And this was not simply because they liked the sound of their own voice, but because it was essential to boil down these profound questions, to understand them, and to hopefully forge a higher unity, which, as I'm about to talk about, did happen. So that's my moan over for the time being. I can't guarantee I won't moan again, but there we go. So for Marx and Engels, membership of the Communist League was primarily to join a vehicle to issue a statement about a new form of communism, explained via the manifesto, which also entailed an organizational remodeling in accordance with the new culture and political template that this initiative would work to. The manifesto was the real draw for Marx and Engels. There were comments here and there from the duo that members of the League were a cause of some misgivings on occasion, given some of the crazy ideas that still lived on in from their past experience, their past political home, low levels of political sophistication, etc. So the manifesto was the real draw for Marx and Engels. And what were they trying to do with that? I'll come to that in a little while. The adoption of the political stance of the Communist Manifesto perforce entailed a revolution in the way adherence to it would organize. What I mean by that is that the old conspiratorial forms of organization would be purged, unless obviously there was a crackdown that repression drove people underground. Then obviously conspiracy in that sense becomes a necessity. But conspiracy in the realm of politics, conspiracy in the realm of the initiatives of mobilizing people, or conspiracy in the sense that it is the change that you're fighting for in terms of a revolutionary change is the result of a coup instigated by small numbers of dedicated people. That went with the adoption of the Communist Manifesto. Two, the organization was radically democratized with an accountable, recallable, elected leadership, and converted to what Marx called a propaganda group, designed to win the battle of ideas amongst working class masses. Not a clandestine group anymore, organized to make minority putschs and coups, and thus, by definition, be sealed off from engaging with the class or even with wider society itself. So clearly, this decision to issue the manifesto as a general communist point of view was a move away from the prevalent sectism that the norm had, as the norm has existed previously. Now, what can we say about that approach? First, I think that it guided this episode of the production of a slim pamphlet brilliantly. It brilliantly dramatizes, in that sense, the method of Marx and Engels in contrast to the conspiratorial sects of their day. And I'm sorry to say, a lot of our contemporary work left in and out of the Labour Party. How, you may ask? Demand, even. Well, there was no watering down of the politics of the Communist Manifesto to win numbers. There was room for eviscerating amendments that gutted the motions of their meaning, but you would have to you'd have to fight and win that in order to push it through. It was a unity based first and foremost on the principles advanced by Marx and Engels, and that had to be fought for. repeatedly clarified, adhered to in practice, and with a new political template demanded. The pamphlet that was addressed to an existing hinterland of communists, that no concessions were given to the sects shibboleths of the past and the conspiratorial cliques that carried them. I suppose in that sense, with this question of principle first, a hard line on principle. What comes to my mind is Trotsky's analogy about pulling the best in the working class towards you. He says, well, you put down a strong ideological political marker, a strong political organization in some ways. So he talks about it in terms of a magnet in an iron forge. You put a magnet into an iron forge, it will attract everything that is strong, attract everything that is tough. So Marx and Engels are interested in the Communist Manifesto in order to draw a line of demarcation and to draw towards them those people who can break from the dominant conspiratorial sect-like existence that communists were, to a certain extent, trapped in at that time. Again, I'll come back to it. Time was taken to air the differences and clarify meanings. I have not read the detailed timetable of these boisterous meetings of the Communist League, but I'll bet you a pound to a pinch of shit that Marx and others were not allocated 3 minutes to expound their ideas. It would be laughed out of the conference center, I would have thought. The debate lasted weeks, as Marx tells us. They took their politics in a very serious type of way, a way that puts us, all of us, quite frankly, to shame. And despite the fact that the looming revolution of 1848 added urgency to the communists getting their act together, there was still no concession to hazy or soft political formulations or to a truce with the set politics of the past. That is one, I would suggest, one of the lessons that we carry with us from the Communist Manifesto. The other one I want to talk about, which I don't know, well, I think it will be controversial to a certain extent, is the question of program. Now, certain sections of the left have for some time had a sort of allergy against programs, fundamentally because they want to make swift moves and turnarounds without being burdened too much with the question of principle, in my view. So what was the Communist Manifesto? What was it as an entity? Was it simply an influential political pamphlet? I'd say no, but that's how the SWP insisted on dubbing it in their 2003 reprint. That's when they were calling it a text for today 3 times in this very skiddy intro by Chris Harman. Was it just a propaganda work or a scientific study? Scientific in this context means theoretical rather than something that has a propaganda or agitational aim. Again, no from me. Or the most crass that I've ever come across as a designation for what precisely the Communist Manifesto was it just an early agitational pamphlet? No, that was the communists remember them, the RCP, some of whom are now in the House of Lords, so they clearly imbibed a lot of Marxism. The Communist Manifesto is a program. The shyness to name it as such tells us a great deal more about the programmatic allergy of some groups that shy away from the word. It doesn't tell us anything about the Marx-Engels template. More than that, its true nature should be recognized as there are different takes on the whole question of program, which I'm sure will come out in the discussion. Its true nature should be recognized as clearly a minimum maximum program. Now, a great deal of nonsense is spoken about minimum maximum programs, and if there are some Trotskyist comrades in the audience, they'll be telling themselves, and here comes some more of it. But let me quickly outline my understanding of this category. The minimum component of a program describes those commitments, those minimum commitments to transferring political power from the capitalist class to the working class, without which a workers' party will not participate in government or form a provisional government that might arise from mass unrest or insurrection. It is a template for the now, and unfortunately, we've actually seen the disasters of the likes of Syriza and others who've fallen for the notion that simply getting into government is to be into power. It's an illusion that I think many comrades in the Labour Party, and you hear it in how they designate winning a general election, is coming to power. It is not. The minimum programme is that which, without which the working class party should not participate in a government or a provisional government that might rise in any type of way, unless the conditions of the minimum programme are achieved. The maximum programme then is more sketchy. It essentially would outline the general idea of communism, the state, the withering away of the state, the withering away of the family as an economic institution, the future, the communist future in that sense. So working in the same general programmatic template, Marx, for example, writes in the Communist Manifesto that communists fight for the attainment of immediate demands, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class. Of course we do that. But in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. So the program includes not just immediate demands to improve the economic conditions of the working class. Yes, that, but something more, High politics can also be included in the question of what we fight for in the immediate period as part of the minimum program, e.g., democratic demands. These indeed must form, what would you say, a spinal cord within the minimum program. For example, in Germany in 1848, the Marx Party stood for sweeping away the small, silly little kingdoms and principalities, the city-states, electorates, etc. But it also envisaged a fight against the petty bourgeoisie, an alliance with the bourgeoisie at that time, interestingly. But that would be, quote unquote, a prelude to an immediate following of proletarian revolution. When the document, The Demands of the Communist Party in Germany, was released March 1848, Marx and Engels supplemented the manifesto with a series of concrete minimum demands. And certainly when it came to the attitude towards the bourgeoisie and petty bourgeoisie, which includes the peasantry, a necessary corrective was introduced. The demands no longer present the bourgeoisie as an ally against the forces of reaction. Instead, quote, the proletariat, the petty bourgeoisie, and the small peasants are urged to support with all possible energy the 17 minimum demands presented by the communists. And to give you a flavor of what those minimum demands were: universal suffrage, universal arming of the people, aid for the peasantry, a state bank to replace all private banks, nationalization of the means of transport, complete separation of church and state, universal free education, and the clarion call, the overarching important issue, the whole of Germany shall be declared a single and indivisible republic, i.e. it would include Austria, for example. Such a republic with a considerable population can alone realize, safeguard, and take the minimum program forward to the higher task of the maximum program, the transition towards communism itself. Too many comrades seem to hear, when they hear the word minimum, they hear the word minimal. In doing so, they actually reject, as a matter of supposed principle, the concept of a minimum section of the party's program, i.e. a logically designed series of immediate demands and perspectives under the socio-economic conditions of capitalism, which, when orchestrated, their fulfillment transform the workers into a class that is ready to seize actual power, come to rule. Marx did not, as illustrated by the Communist Manifesto. So I'm actually going to leave it there. I think I've spoken for 25 minutes, something like that, half an hour. I'm not absolutely sure. Because those are the two sharpest political issues, I think, that can be drawn from the experience of the Communist Manifesto, how it came to be the Communist Manifesto in the first place, and this question of program. I think this is something that we have historically paid far too little attention to, and when we have paid attention to it, the debate or bun fight between different trends within the movement has not really cast a great deal of light upon it. It is, however, something that we need to go back to again. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I'll be interested in what comments say.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I'll give you a few moments to rest, although I have a few questions for you myself. Could I just remind comrades that if you want to ask a question or make a comment, could you please use the participants section and click on the blue hand function. You can also use the chat box as well, and I see that some comrades have been putting sort of questions in that, so Mark would have a look at some of the comments that have been raised. Okay, can I see please the first comrade who wants to ask a question, make a contribution?
That's Steve. Can you see him? Steve.
Yeah, okay. Okay, Steve, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. The opening passage of the Communist Manifesto is a specter is haunting Europe. Excuse me. Now, I understand that that's overstating the case, isn't it? Because communism wasn't even a blip on the radar by that time. The ruling classes were more concerned about the great bourgeois revolutions, weren't they? End of question.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I think Anthony wants to come in.
I think there's the greatest potential for revolutionary socialist or communist change ever. Capitalism is in a profound crisis, and as Trotsky said in 1940, about the socialization of production, humanity is finished. And you can see Pilsen have lost all these wars. They haven't. They failed to restore capitalism in Serbia. They got the natural resources in Kosovo for restoration of capitalism. They lost the Afghan war. They lost Iraq. Libya, they're going for a period now, that's in a bigger mess and proxy wars. So that's why that led to the financial crisis of 2008 on that hand. But this is the key question. I think what we also have to look at is what's happening to the middle class. And Marx was sectarian on the middle class in the sense that he said that you put the bourgeoisie against the middle class. In the epoch of the decay of capitalism, the middle class are pauperized by the ruling class. Unless you have a program for the ruling with the middle class, you can't overthrow capitalism. But what he did say, which is correct, and which Trotsky analyzed the different stages of the middle class from the rise, the ascendancy of capitalism in its decay, it's that the middle class. The middle class could come over to the working layers of the middle class could come over to the working class and give the workers a leadership. And you can see it now in the most clearest form, not just that last one, which I'll talk about in a minute, but in the education system over the mass unionization under joining the labour movement, so there'll be more proletarian under some of the other middle classes, but questioning the private schools and saying, and if they hadn't got the teachers' assessment, they would have gone after the private schools more intellectually. And the health service is in crisis. The worst crisis is the Second World War mentally, with the staff and in education. Every structure of society is in crisis. You got one of the biggest economic crises ever. So and then you've had the Black Lives movements. Because if you hadn't have had that mass, and the reason the middle class again are radicalized, and they're radicalized with the most downtrodden and oppressed black masses. That's why the oppression is so important to have a problem for the oppressed and the working class. And you can see this mass radicalization around the Black Lives movement. If you hadn't have had that, fascism and Trump would even been more dangerous, because it slowed that timetable down. But I think one last point, I want to talk about the Popular Front. Because I didn't say it, because of the Popular Front, you got concessions in order to justify it. Because the workers were seizing factories because of the revolution there. And so did the revolution when it stopped the Second World War. But in 1938, a year before World War II, after the Munich Pact, the 45-hour week was withdrawn. And in 1939, you had the Second World War, one of the worst wars since the First World War. And in Spain, you had the victory of Franco. We can clearly see the Popular Front with Biden. It might give some reform to stop the upheaval to like Roosevelt did, but his main aim is him and the owner of the Democratic Party will find a fascism hand, which is pauperizing the middle class. And as Trotsky said in Weather of France, when you support a bourgeois party, you're betraying the lower middle classes, because they're more unstable than the upper middle classes. The upper middle class are tied up with capital, but that's why the fascists have to have this anti-capitalist demagogy to do the working class. So they go for an experience with them bourgeois parties, and that's why they can be unstable left and right. But I think the working class can move. I think Trump's finished now, because there's talk about a general strike before the election. But what's needed in America is a Labour Party based on the unions. And I agree with my comrade Steve on the American elections. But I think, as Trotsky said in 1937, just because capitalism's decaying, they go like any other system, fights to survive. That's why you have to have a demand. But the whole essence of the Communist Manifesto was to challenge capitalism in the advanced countries for a transitional method. The minimum maximum program was when they had the social democratic revisionism of the last one, and I think over the Popular Front of the Stalinist revived of demagogy while you maintain capitalism. And as Trotsky said in what I read today in the introduction to the Communist Manifesto, it's more revolutionary than ever. The reforms are important, it's immediate demand on wages and salaries and things like that. But unless you get rid of capitalism, nobody's going to survive. So it's more revolutionary than ever. So you need a transitional program more than ever, not just a minimum maximum program. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. I've a small question for you, Mark. I wondered if you could just indicate the sort of role that was given to the working class. I know that's one of the sessions that we've got coming up, but you talked about the various artisan groups and the various workers groups that had existed, and of course the various communist groups that existed and that Marx was involved with. But I would be quite interested for you to talk about how Marx differed from them, particularly on the question of the role of the working class. I think there's one other comrade's got a hand up as well in this round.
Do you want to bring in Mark first?
No, take another comrade.
I was going to ask something as well, Kevin, if that's okay.
Sorry, Tina.
I was going to speak as well. I can't indicate, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay, all right. We're bringing you, Tina, and then Steve. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to make him into a panelist. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks very much, Mark. Enjoyed that. I think you focused on the what's around the Communist Manifesto, what happened around it, why it was produced, how it was produced, and etc. And that's very useful. I hope you could also talk a little bit more about the content, perhaps, which is also very well, it was very revolutionary, wasn't it? I mean, there's Steve mentioned, you know, there's the first sentence is quite famous. A spectre is haunting Europe. It was mistranslated, wasn't it? The first time it was translated into a hobgoblin, I think, is in the English.
Hobgoblin.
Hobgoblin is chasing around Europe or something like that. It was just funny. But you know, Steve said communism, socialism didn't really play a huge role then at the time. But it kind of came into being, didn't it, with the working class, with the development of the working class. And there's a whole chapter where Marx and Engels look at, socialisms that are the opposite of socialism, that call themselves socialist, feudal socialism, bourgeois socialism, etc. So it was quite it was becoming quite trendy to put out the word socialism there, because the working class was coming into being. And I think that's where the Communist Manifesto is giving some really inspiring and interesting thoughts about how capitalism was born, as a sort of in opposition to feudalism. The first bourgeoisies, the bourgeois are coming up and are starting to organize and are starting to make revolution against monarchy, etc. And within the birth of capitalism, though, as he said, and I think the last sentence in the first chapter is the capitalism gives birth to its own gravedigger, the working class, which is the whole idea of dialectics that you have already, you're being born, but with it, capitalism produces what will kill it in the end. Well, we're still waiting for that particular one. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit how that, is that still, in your view, is that still what's going to have to happen, and how is it going to happen with the changes in the, how the working class is organized? I mean, in lockdown, especially, I think with lockdown, with this whole pandemic, we will see a massive further atomization of the working class into, home working, being home, being a freelancer, being, Marx, when Marx was writing, it was all about bringing people together, wasn't it? Bringing the working class together into factories where they could become a working class, a class of united, formulating their demands, etc. How this is now all really changing quite massively, and I think after the pandemic, it will have made another massive leap forward, backward, well, however one you look at it, but with the atomization of the working class. So that's quite a difficult one, I think, for us to organize. I mean, we can organize via Zoom, etc., but it is different, isn't it, to being in the workplace together and organizing as a class. I also thought there was things in it which are quite beautiful in the Communist Manifesto, on the question of family, for example, the bourgeois family, how that is quite a reactionary concept, and a concept to control women and control property, and how they are envisaging that the abolition of the bourgeois family. Instead, we're arguing for the community of women, which is quite nice, and sort of going back to a primitive communism that sort, because that has existed before. So yeah, just a few random thoughts there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tina. And I'll just bring in Steve.
Can I come back briefly?
Oh, sorry, Mark, do you want to come back now?
Okay, yeah, just briefly. Sorry, Steve.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. I'll mute myself.
My apologies, comrades. I'm not getting everything that people are saying. I missed the contribution of the comrade who spoke first. I'm sorry. I'm in a place with thick walls, which I don't know. I'm losing quite a bit of what comes asking me. Yeah, Tina makes some interesting points to think about the nature of the working class at present. I mean, undoubtedly there are simply objective things that throw the working class together as a class, but that is only one part of the question. So yes, we have seen the decline of the industrial working class, but we've seen the rise of the working population, people becoming working class. There's a process of proletarianization that goes on constantly, given the pressure of capital itself. So, you go back for some time, and the notion of being a nurse or whatever, you're Florence Nightingale, aren't you? You're the do-gooder daughter of some rather well-off family, etc. Teachers at one stage were regarded as sort of middle class. Nurses were regarded as middle class. There's a pressure, just objectively, in terms of how capitalism works, to proletarianize more and more people. Fundamentally, this is a question of ideology, a question of ideas. That is where we have been defeated. Not in the fact that, oh, we're all middle class now. That's bullshit. Right? We have been defeated in the realm of theory. So, and the theory has led into bad practice. So yes, our class is, yes, atomized to a considerable extent. That is true. It is demoralized at the moment, and quite frankly, you know, you can't blame the Tories and capitalism for everything. The COVID has come along, and it would be a problem for any society, however it was organized. But so yes, absolutely, we have got a problem. The problem is of, in that sense, our own making. Right? I believe it is a problem that we can overcome. Some of the things that I've said tonight, I think, are small steps towards the beginning of overcoming these things. And in that sense, I think the working class has never, on a global scale, quite apart from the objective process that I described of proletarianization, the working class on a global scale has never been bigger, right? Has never been bigger. And yet we flounder, yet we're subject to whatever the whim is of particular leaders, of particular despots, etc. Why are we in that situation? I think that is the question that we actually ask. We want to see. It's a big ask, but nevertheless, what we should be thinking about is making Marxism in amongst the parties, communist parties, etc. Obviously, it would be the norm. But let's take the Labour Party. I think that the common sense of every working class organization, trade unions, the Labour Party, etc., chess clubs, almost, I don't care, I've included all. The common sense ideology, the common sense politics should be Marxism. Simple as that. Now, that sounds very odd, and comrades have very often a very fixed, a very static way of looking at the political organizations that exist at the moment, how they're arrayed across the politics, what is appropriate to put forward in the Labour Party, and what is not appropriate. I think we have to break out of that self-imposed straitjacket, really. I think, as I say, that the common sense ideology, political ideology of the working class should be Marxism, and that should be so within the Labour Party as it is in a Communist Party or a Marxist Party. Now, the Labour Party cannot be a communist party in and of itself. It has affiliations, etc. That's its strength, and partially its weakness. But that is the type of perspective that we ought to have. In the early 20s, when the Communist Party was being formed, for example, there was discussions about affiliation to the Labour Party, and eventually the party did vote for attempting to join the Labour Party as an affiliate, and the Labour Party obviously turned it down. But there was one comrade who put it very well. He said, well, we want a Labour Party, i.e. affiliates, etc., to the party, trade unions affiliated to the party, yes, to the party, all of that, yes. Right? However, we want a Labour Party with a communist mind, he put it, right? That the Labour Party can't be a communist party in the sense that, you know, if you got backward ideas and some slightly dodgy attitudes, and you're in a union, if the union is affiliated to the Labour Party specifically, then, you know, it's not a communist party in that sense. Communist members are judged politically in that way. So, yes, there's a long way to go, and as things stand at the moment, things look pretty desperate. However, you know, we do have the tremendous advantage that what we're saying marries, fits contemporary society and fits reality. It fits what goes on in the world and what could be changed for the better. That is the strength that we have. So, you know, again, I emphasize this question of ideas, ideology, education of the working class, etc. To not hearing comments properly. Kevin said something about the role of the working class. Well, in that sense, it's it's the old phrase that you know, that the bourgeoisie creates its own grave digger. The fact that collectivity is the natural form of the working class life experience essentially pushes it towards socialistic, organic types of forms of organization. I reiterate again, obviously our class exists politically at a very low level at the moment, but I think given that it is in its intrinsic nature as a class to be of the left, to have solidarity with others, to in that sense anticipate the overcoming of capitalism as a system as a whole, I think that there can be a very quick change in the worldview, the perspective of a great many people very, very quickly. I think there were specific problems with the whole Corbyn experience, including, I think, some of the things that Corbyn did. However, that did show that there is amongst working people, there is a tremendous thirst for something different. They're aware, even if in a very vague type of way, that this is not the way things should be. Again, I'm sorry, I missed the first commenter who spoke. I missed his contribution because of the failure of my machine. So if you could say it again, I'll.
Okay, Mark. Yeah, you're having some technical problems. I wonder if you could face the camera, because on occasions your voice is fading when you turn.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Steve Freeman and then Ollie Perkins.
Hi, Mark. Happy New Year to you and to Tina and Kevin and all the other comrades. I think we've got 50 people down there on the call. So happy New Year to everybody. It's a bit late now, but better late than never. I've got 2 points, Mark, to make. One is just an observation about some of the content of the manifesto. And then another one, the second one is about programs, the thing that you focused a bit on. So one of the things that really did strike me about the Communist Manifesto, which is still so relevant today, is where it talks about the kind of the revolutionary nature of capitalism. That capitalism comes into the world and it blows away, as it were, by its new technologies, its new methods of production. It blows away all the existing walls. It breaks down Chinese walls. I think it's got Chinese walls in now because I haven't got the manifesto in front of me, but he breaks down barriers. It destroys the old order. It destroys all the old classes. But of course, it does so by raising the exploitation to a higher level. It's not liberating us in doing this. It's liberating us from the old ways of doing things, but it's not liberating people from the new forms of exploitation. And part of that is what Marx is warning about is the danger, and I think it's called reactionary socialism. But you can imagine that people who got drawn into the factory system would hark back and think, you know what, wasn't it better when we were hand loom weavers? Couldn't we go backwards to a better past where things were better than being in this horrible, vile machine-based factory? So there was always a tendency for exploited people to look back to things. Now, when you read that passage, you think he could be talking about today, because capitalism is still doing this today in its globalization process that's going on. But Marx's point really was that what we have to do is not to retreat from globalization, but kind of communism is about transcending it to something higher, something more global than capitalism. And when you see Trumpism, when you see what's happening to Rust Belt America, the slogan "Make America Great Again" is a kind of way in which the right is going, didn't it used to be better in the past before globalization came along? Couldn't we go back to this great brackets white America that we had? But that appeal of reactionary ideas is about going back, and so we have to be absolutely clear. The revolutionary nature of capitalism doesn't make us want to go backwards. It makes us want to go beyond that. Okay, and I think that part in the manifesto is so relevant. When you read it, you think it could be talked about today. So that's my first point. Second point is about programs, and I agree with you in the distinction between minimum, and a lot of kind of sterile debate has gone on between minimum and transitional programs, where Trotskyists talk about transitional, and I don't know, sometimes it's Stalinists or whoever it is talking about minimum programs. And I agree with you on the idea of the minimum program. I think it's still very relevant. But I think what we should, to try to get away from that debate, is to think the idea that the minimum program of that time was itself a transitional program, because it was a kind of idea that you could go forward from where you are today. And essentially it's a set of demands that don't take you in itself beyond capitalism. They don't abolish capitalism. They might bring land nationalization. You read out, Mark, in the program of the German party, I think, a whole list of demands, which if you read them now would still be in advance where we are today, but they don't really take you beyond capitalism, but they do put capitalism, as it were, on the spot. So the minimum program is a program of reforms, and I think that takes us, as it were, on the next step. And it's a program of practical reforms, and probably nothing in it. You couldn't point to some country in the world that didn't have that. I mean, you could talk about the arming of the people, but then you could look at the American Revolution and say, oh, well, they already did that back then. You know, it's nothing wild. It's already been done. Most of the things in the minimum program have been done somewhere at some time. And so I think that the key thing about the minimum program, and we better to use this term, was it was a Republican program. And the one for Germany, the first demand of it was that Germany should be one and indivisible republic. And the Bolshevik program, 1903, was a minimum program, but it was a Republican program. Now, the argument about them is that somehow this idea is outdated. You know, in late capitalism, the minimum program doesn't work anymore because we've already gone beyond. But I think that's untrue, and that's why I'm much more on the side of what you said. I think the minimum program would be a weapon. A Republican program would be a weapon that we could use today. It doesn't demand, it isn't in itself communism, but it demands a step forward. And what Corbyn did really was he had a program of practical reforms, but essentially it was about going back to 1945. It wasn't a Republican program. It was a kind of restore the post-war situation for the modern day, you know. So I think there is a dispute with Corbyn, but I think it's got to be with the issues that you raised. Very radical Democratic and Republican demands have got to be part of what we're doing, and it's nothing wild, but actually quite difficult to do. So I think there is a Republican minimum program that would be very useful in the Labour Party, which doesn't demand the Labour Party becomes a communist party, which, as you said, it's not going to happen. Well, I hope you could hear that, Mark, anyway. Oh, you can hear some of it anyway.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Ollie Perkins and then Anne McShane.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully you can hear this, Mark. Okay, yeah, I thought that was very good. And I guess in terms of relevance of the text, I rather than just sort of focusing on the relevance of the theory, I think also it's important to look at the relevance of the problems that Marx and Engels were facing when dealing with the text or writing the manifesto. And surely the name in and of itself, a manifesto for a communist party, brings up a problem, as you mentioned, because there wasn't a communist party. And I think surely if we look at our own position now, we're very much in the same position. There isn't a communist party in Great Britain. There are lots of organizations that call themselves a communist party, but nothing worthy of the name, all small sects or, little groups, etc. Okay. And I think also an important part of, having the text also is clearly that the working class with a communist party, with a theoretical and discipline basis, principle basis, without it, the working class is nothing. It's, doomed to atomization, disorganization, reactionary ideas, etc. But surely that, with a communist party, hence a manifesto, the working class can actually be, it's got the potential to be everything. Okay, so surely then perhaps, as a question, surely is it not the question of our epoch to fulfill this need of having a mass communist party? And you mentioned Labour Party with a communist mind. There's some great articles in the Weekly Worker by William Sarsfield on the question of having of just the sort of things a mass communist party can do, the sort of influence it can have, on internationalism. You can even stop wars if you want, organize mass groups of people, the unemployed, etc., that wouldn't already be so. So having a mass communist party is an incredibly important question. Okay. And yeah, obviously, you mentioned the relationship with the Labour Party, and I would agree with that. But yeah, surely it's about leading the working class and leading it by example, etc. Just one thing I would like to mention as well is on this question of minimum maximum program. I would say, in response to Steve, is that well, it's minimum and maximum, isn't it? They're two sides of the same coin. Once you focus surely on the just on the minimum section, that sort of leads you down a dark transitional path, as it were, and you end up with any demand becomes a minimum demand with, if you sprinkle on a bit of Trotskyist transitional fairy dust. Okay. So yeah, I would just like to say, quite frankly, I was really shocked when I was at a meeting of the LLA. One comrade who called himself a Marxist, saying that we cannot accept even what you listed out as minimum demands to put out. Because, for example, a republic, getting monarchy, or a workers' militia, because if we went to the workers with that, they would laugh at us. Meanwhile, I must say, at the same time as this was going on, you had BLM protests, people calling for the abolition of the police. So it makes perhaps a bit ridiculous. All I would say is that I'm glad he mentioned the intellectual life of the British working class. I have got it. A friend gave it to me a few years ago, and I have finally just got around to finishing it. But you know, we shouldn't treat the working class as stupid. They are capable of you know, immense theoretical and practical ability. They can do it. What we need surely is an organization to put them on the path and be able to lead the working class in a principled, organized and disciplined way, not calling for you know, a 15% pay rise for NHS workers. Surely this is you know, perhaps a question the LLA needs to grip with as a, you know, a real programmatical question. I'll shut up.
Okay, thanks, Ollie. Anne McShane.
Okay, thanks, comrades. I'm not going to put my camera on because I'm a little bit unwell and I'm in my bed. But thankfully, it's not COVID. But anyway, I didn't think that you'd appreciate the size of me, the blankets here. Anyway, so really, I wanted to connect with what the points that Tina made, because look, I mean, I understand the points that Mark is making about you know, necessity for program, the necessity for debate, the necessity for, you know, rigor and ambition, and you know, the minimum maximum questions and all of those. But I think, as well as seeing the significance of the Communist Manifesto to our struggle today, I do think it is important to look at the distinctions between the epoch they were writing in and the epoch we're in now. Because I think that Marx and Engels, certainly in the Communist Manifesto and in other writings of the time, did believe that capitalism itself was in the process of throwing up conditions that the working class really had to just simply take advantage of. I think that they saw something far more dynamic than came to pass. For instance, on the woman question, I mean, they very much believed, and I believe that this is reflected in the Communist Manifesto also, that the very process of women being drawn into the workforce would create the conditions of bringing male workers and women workers together as workers, and that they would, you know, unite around their common understanding of themselves as a working class, and that equally that capitalism itself will almost itself do away with domestic labor, because it would become illogical for capitalism, you know, to have people still working in the home when it could make things, you know, so when it could socialize various aspects. So I think that's important. I mean, it's not to say, oh, they were wrong and that's like an attack on them. I think it was, you know, predicated on the period that they were in. And like Mark talked about the process of proletarianization today, but equally, don't you think that we have this opposite problem of, in a certain sense, not deproletarianization, but atomization? I think Tina also mentioned it. Like, I listened to a Cosmonaut interview there recently with workers, you know, couriers in the 0 hours economy, which is really major in the United States. And what struck me was the kind of hellishness of their existence, really, because they were trying to organize workers, but they themselves had like 3 jobs, you know, on call for this, on call for that, and not, you know, like not having even the kind of conditions that many workers would have had at the beginning of the 20th century. So, you know, like there's been a lot that's been thrown back there, which I think, and obviously, you know, you spoke about the political defeats, the defeat of theory, and obviously we've got the defeat of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, I don't want to come across as though being, you know, I'm being really pessimistic, but I think that it's become, in a certain sense, because of what's happened, it's become more complicated, don't you think? Because, you know, because the way in which capitalism has gone into crisis has made it more difficult for the working class to take advantage of conditions the way that Marx and Engels thought they would, and even to organize in the manner that they would have been able to organize, say, 50 years ago. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Anne, and get better soon. Okay, Mark Metcalf.
Hi, everybody. and Happy New Year. A couple of observations is the fact that obviously communism at certain points in the working class has in fact been popular, hasn't it? So the manifesto in itself did achieve a great deal. The problems, particularly after the First World War, and where people moved away from communism was, of course, when they got to find out what it was really like to live under communism. So the examples of the Soviet Union were thrown back at socialists. The gulags were thrown back at socialists. People were, and then what happened was the pathetic defense of those gulags and the repression by the Stalinist political organizations. And so therefore the working class could see in reality for them what communism actually meant when communism took over. We still have in this country a small handful, but also nuisances, let's put it this way, who do believe still in Stalinism and who've disaffected many thousands of working class people when they've gone into struggle. The other thing is where communism has proven to come onto the political arena in big occasions has been the oppression of imperialism themselves. The truth of the matter is that it has been the repressive measures which have been taken to either destabilize communism from within as such and without, which has moved working class people away from thinking that communism has anything to do with them. I would take exception with a number of the comrades when they say things that have not got better. For large numbers of working class people, their lives are significantly better. New technology has made that so. I live on a working class estate. You couldn't really get much more of a working class estate where I live. Basically, we also have migrant labor living on the estate, numbers of black people and white people. Nearly everybody on that estate, on this estate, has a car. Some people have a couple of cars, and many of them do very what you describe as very ordinary jobs, working in factories which are not great, not even unionized, but they still have the amount of money which allows them to go abroad on holiday or to have cars. So I think, and it also has to be said in this country that the greatest advance which was made for working class people, or a section of working class people in this country, was given to them by the Tories, by which I mean the right to buy. In other words, large dollops of cash was given out to working class people, and many of them, certainly the Brexit vote which took place, was motivated by people who were able to take up the right to buy. They wish to hang on to their property and possessions. And the issue of property is an important one, certainly across Western Europe. People are fearful of communism because they believe that, in fact, their capital will be taken off them. So that direct big C, in essence, for many working class people isn't necessarily a threat. It's actually an advantage for them. What we have to do, in my view, is to be able to answer how would socialism, how would communism build on those advances which capitalism has made, not for everybody. Clearly, millions, billions of people are suffering tragically in other countries and other states. But it would be wrong to describe capitalism as an entirely negative force for the working class, because that just is simply not the case. In regard to Tina's observation that the working class is alienated, there's certainly that about it during this current period of time. And therefore, just on a sort of personal level, what I can say is, for example, say in my own case, like an example, a booklet that I had out recently as a trade union booklet, I would have expected the launch of that, if it had taken place, of about 50 people. And yet online on Zoom, 400 people came. So there was a much larger audience, a much greater reception. You don't get the interactions, but you do get the numbers of people who are interested. So there is and remains an interest. There's no point definite. And finally, of course, it has to be noted that on Saturday, the largest ever meeting took place on Zoom with 400,000 people going to the NAU teachers meeting. They weren't all teachers, but it showed that the issues, which is important, people wanted to know about it. And therefore there was a mass movement in itself, with 16,000 people joining the National Education Union on the actual day of the actual speeches and those sorts of talks. It is very frustrating, there's no doubt at the moment, that we can't get out and be doing things and talking to people. And yeah, I'll finish there. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Mark. I haven't got any other comrades who've indicated to come in, and we are getting towards the end of the timed session. So I'll ask Mark to sum up. So Mark, if you'd like to just respond to some of the contributions and make a general summing up.
Thanks very much, Conor. Some very interesting contributions. I won't be able to address them all, and apologies if I not heard them properly. I'll start with Mark Metcalf's contribution, which I thought was very useful. The things he's pointed to, the fact that the whole notion of socialism, of communism, of a fundamental change in the way the world is ordered, has the image of it has been degraded by the experience of Stalinism. There's no question that is true. I can't think of any shortcuts to get around that, other than precisely coming forward. We'll stop. Well, the contemporary left, as we are, to stop actually still acting like tin pot Stalinists, which we still haven't got rid of it in our own movement. I'm afraid. The lack of democracy, the difference between rank and file members and the leadership, etc. It still plagues our movement today. So the first thing that we've got to do is cleanse our own ranks if we want to actually start talking about the Stalinists and what they did, etc. People are not going to believe us unless we actually undertake to cleanse our own ranks. On Marx and Engels and the people who came before them, well, actually, if you read in the Communist Manifesto, they are actually, in general, quite complimentary of these people. They were often, if you look at somebody like Robert Owen or whatever, often reaching for solutions, communistic style solutions, even though they were hidebound to a certain extent by who they were, what they'd come from, the fact that they were individuals, somebody like Robert Owen, owning factories, and the communists and the socialists, etc. But nevertheless, they pointed a way out of capitalism, something beyond capitalism, and Marx and Engels actually praised them for that.
Mark, we're losing you, kind of. I think have you got anything over your microphone? It's very difficult to. If you could.
I don't have anything over my microphone. I'll shout. How's that? Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Apologies for that comment. Yeah, they were respectful of those who had come before them. That's what I just emphasized. Anne's point about atomization and the illogicality of some aspects of a lot of aspects of contemporary society. Yes, absolutely. This is so. But again, the potential is there for mass working class movements with a different template for running society. This has nothing to do with the endless sort of merry-go-round of mainstream Labour Party governments displacing Tories, then the other way around. No, what one of the projects of Marxism is one, a mass movement for communism, a mass movement for fundamental change, and two, that movement being in such a position of power because of who it's composed of, because of its program, etc., making radical incursions on capital's right to rule under present-day circumstances. For example, I have a bugbear about various industries which I regard as totally useless. We should abolish all sorts of different things, but things like insurance, for example, have a different system. Insurance, what Marx referred to as invented needs that the advertising industry does. No, they are squandering the resources of our world, and they shouldn't be allowed to do it under present day circumstances. Having that type of ambition, having that type of program, as I say, which encroaches on the ability of capital to rule, even when we're still under capitalism, I think that can knit society back together again to actually overcome the atomization that we have. But this is all about politics. This is all about those of us who call ourselves communists and socialists and Marxists, actually taking these tasks and the onus on us, taking it seriously. And I think at the moment, given the way we organize, much like the tiny little sectarian sects that Marx and Engels were trying to get rid of in a nice type of way, right? We're organized now. If we talk about the SWP, the Socialist Party, other organizations, we have regressed, and yet we do have that image. We do have that possibility. We do have that past, that history, which shows us a way out of the atomization you're talking about. Whether we do it or not, that's up in the air. We don't do it. That'll be that, in my view. And on that happy note, I think I'll leave you. Thank you, comrades.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Happy note or not. I'd like to thank you for you and the other comrades for your contribution this evening. We've got off to an interesting start. And I think that the rest of the sessions are also going to provoke thought and discussion. Next week's session will be me talking about Marx and Engels, their background and relationship, and I'll talk about their political development, and in particular, the way that they came together in the 1840s and really the influences that shaped their ideas. So again, a historical background, but I think something that goes beyond that to try and see the way that socialists interact with the politics and with the society around them, where they try to understand the nature of that world, the world that's coming into existence, but above all, the way that they try to develop a politics that can change that world, the sort of things that we were talking about this evening. If you would like to find out more about the sessions, they're on the LLA website, they're in the education section, and there are a number of suggested readings there which would help you in your discussion and so on. So thanks very much, comrades. We had over 70 people at the beginning of the session. Number of comrades left early to go to other meetings, but that's the way of it these days. So I'll finish now. Just wish everybody again a happy new year, and I look forward to seeing you for the rest of the sessions. So good evening.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, comrades.
Bye, Kevin.